Okay, fellow do-it-yourselfers, this is a overview of a project I recently finished, adding a coffered ceiling to my, what I call my library, really. You could call it my study. So this image here is to give you kind of an end idea or a result of what the end product is. A coffered ceiling with some inlay and some wainscoting, some cans, some LED cans, and some crown molding. Here's what I started with. So, your basic empty room had some challenges with some pre-existing plumbing that was in here. So, I wish this image would go away. There we go. So, obviously the first thing was for me to prep the room, tearing out the existing drywall covering some plumbing that was up there. And here's kind of the first shot to give you a realistic idea of what the setup looks like. For me, you can see there's a drain line coming through here that I had to move. The prior, um, whatever you want to call it, chase that was coming through here was significantly bigger than what I wanted for my coffers. So I had to, move that pipe over a couple inches and get the pressure lines out of the way and kind of compact them all into the one faux beam there. But essentially all you're doing here for me, since I've used drywall for this solution, is created, the faux beams. I kind of mass produced these on the floor and then nailed them all up at once. The biggest guidance I'd give you on doing this is to be very careful. The ceiling, we're going to assume my house is relatively new construction. The ceiling's flat. If your ceiling's not flat, you're going to have to set up some way, to make sure that the bottom of the coffers that you put in are flat. What I discovered as I went through the project is having the initial framework here not be perfect really creates problems down the road. And I had two or three places where I had a beam that was, a quarter inch thicker at one corner than another, and it was a hassle to have to fix a real hassle. So when you're putting this up, be very careful to make all the framing perfectly straight and perfectly the same width and perfectly the same height. For me, I went for 9x6 beams, so my framing is 8.5 by 5.5. You'll see here on the ceiling where I have chalk lined every floor joist before I even started the project. You can see a chalk line on the white. That was very helpful. Highly recommend doing that. Yeah, you use that constantly as a reference point as you're going through the project. Some more pictures of it. You can again see the chalk lines. It's real important. I had a bunch of old can lights. You can see the 6 can lights I had to remove before I put in the 10 new ones. At this point, obviously, I'm doing all the electrical work. So hopefully the next picture will give you kind of a sense of the electrical work. Plumbing, not anything big there. Okay, I did have to make an access point for my LED lighting. So if you're going to do a backlighting like I'm doing, keep that in mind in designing your beams and doing your initial framing work. You're going to have an outlet somewhere that has to have an access panel to it to access the transformers for the LED lighting. Okay, here we're starting to get the wainscoting in. So this is unfortunately a big gap, a huge gap in work. You can see all the holes in here where the LED, now the LED cans are tiny, they're not like the big old 6-inch cans that you had with the incandescent lighting. They're 2.5 inches or 3.25, something like that. And in most of the cases, they went in easy. And anyway, just be prepared for that. By the time I'm finished and getting to put up this wainscoting, you'll see most of these I end up with almost all the drywall missing because so much work to run the wiring to get all these cans installed. Very nice getting the wainscoting in before I did any drywalling work. Really saved a lot of time. So got the cans in, then got the wainscoting in. Another big leap forward. I painted the wainscoting before I put the drywall in. And that ended up being very handy when I went to have to cut things in later. And I didn't make it perfect because I still had to come back with the caulk and cover over all the nail holes and put another coat or two on it, but this is a big time saver. I just J-channeled the top edge of the drywall, so it's J-channeled and drywall. Then obviously I'm going to corner bead all the bottom of this, and this is just after some preliminary taping done here. You can see the access panel over here where I'm accessing the transformers for the LED lighting. Had to do a little drywall on the walls to cover up where that old chase was quite a bit bigger than the new one. Same image here, or same day probably. Just another view. Probably the same day again, another view. Okay, got a lot more drywall work done here. On this, corner bead work, it is very important when you're putting up this corner bead to make sure everything's perfectly level. If you're doing the inlays on the bottom like I did, getting these level across and from here to here, and your inlays are going to have a problem if you're not very careful. Take the time to put up all this corner bead nice and level. It will absolutely pay for itself in time saved down the road. I don't know that a whole lot else got done there. A little more drywalling work. Here I'm starting to install the the pine here to make the inlaid effect. And it looks like I've already put in the LED lighting. The LED lighting is pretty straightforward. It's kind of self-adhesive. You put it in. I found the quality of the adhesive backing on the LED strips not to be that great. So I went through every 12 inches or so and put a little screw in next to it and just had the head of the screw barely hit the edge of the taping. What I saw over the course of a couple months is the LED that adhesive backing starting to fail, and I don't want it. I want it to look good always. So if I were you, I'd highly recommend coming up with some way to mechanically fasten your LED lighting. Don't rely on the adhesive to last forever. I painted the bottom of the faux beams the same color as the walls. So here you can see where I've painted the bottom before I even put up the pine, which saved me a huge amount of time not having to cut in all this pine. Well, mostly. But that's why you can see a little bit of the wall color sticking out here. So you've got a drywall edge coming down, J-mold up here, a piece of, I think it was just, I don't remember if it was 1/4 inch by 1/2 inch. I think that's what it was, pine. And I nailed that pine right on the edge of the corner bead, so it looks nice and flat straight down. Then you have this great inlaid effect on the bottom. Here you can see where I was starting to caulk the heads of the nails on the wainscoting. I also glued the wainscoting to the ceiling, certainly highly recommend that. So here's kind of the end shot. Again, I've skipped a couple major steps, but you can see where I've got crown molding on each one. I've taken the time to paint the same dark green that's on the wainscoting. I've painted one little strip on each crown molding. I was just trying to break up this massive white effect. To me, it was, I had 9.5 inches of white coming up here, and then on the crown molding, it was just too much white. So after I had the whole thing done, standing back looking at it, I added that little green stripe around each coffer, and it kind of set it off nice. I did find I ended up having to come back and caulk every one of these pieces of pine just perfectly, where it meets the drywall here. Hours and hours I spent in here just doing tiny little caulk lines on each one of those to make them look nice and perfect. I don't know what other guidance I'd have to you. I wish I could show you where I messed up some drywall, but most of it's been fixed, I think, by this image. But just making sure you get that corner bead on there nice and level, and making the framing level really is important. There's a couple imperfections in here from framing that was messed up that it's kind of hard to see. Let's look at the last image or two, see if we can find it. About the same image, isn't it? Nice little detail of what I did here. Okay, yeah, I worked a lot on what kind of crown to do in the corner of the room. I wanted to put the same crown here, down here, then it didn't. Right now I have the same width here as I have everywhere else, and I can tell you this is what I ended up with, was just matching this little inset pine piece in the corner of the room, and I ended up thinking that was the best. It looked better than the crown over there, and then I had base and crown over there once, and it ate up so much of the fake beam around the edge that it didn't look balanced. I ended up removing it and going back to this tiny little strip. The wood, the wainscoting on the ceiling is sharp. It's probably one of the nicest features I did here, even better than the LED lighting. All right, hope you enjoyed my project.